I'm Cole Harrington. I started the Work From Home Incubator because I'm really trying to figure out how people are living a lifestyle of flexibility, of freedom, and of financial abundance. It seems to be the thing that a lot of us are looking for, and I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, talk to experts in different arenas, get their tips and ideas and on how exactly to be efficient in a space that isn't your normal 9-to-5 job. A lot of us are working from home right now. It really just makes sense for me to dig in, to find out what some tips and tricks are, what the vision is of a lot of people that are currently working from home, and how they plan on accomplishing some of the things that they see for their huge future. I'm hoping that by learning from them, you'll be able to take some ideas, some actionable advice, and really apply that to what you see your goals and dreams being for the future. I want to be able to create for myself the lifestyle, like I said, of freedom, and I'd like to be able to share that with you. I'm super excited about the first guest. Jeremy Ruch is the owner and founder of Bandalier. They're a remote sales and marketing company that is created around the vision of moving fast, of utilizing growth mindset, and Kaizen, which is something that I've looked into for a while now, but you may not be familiar with yet. It's really a concept that it relies on growth mindset, and it relies on changing small habits in order to develop a larger consistency and momentum towards achieving your goals. I thought that might be beneficial for some of you to really, as you're working from home, be able to grow a little bit every single day towards what it is that you see for your freedom and for your future. Enjoy the show, guys. Afterward, check out wfhincubator.com and start your journey today. Thanks. Hey, Jeremy, thanks for being here, man. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so you're in, just so people know where you're coming from, you're in New York City right now?
Correct. I'm actually out on Long Island at my parents' place, where my fiance holed up. We've been joking that it's a good test, certainly, of our relationship. It would also probably be a pretty good start to a TV series about living with your to-be in-laws for an indefinite period of time during a global pandemic. I feel very fortunate to be around people and to be here. So
yeah, personal space, I feel like, is going to become important.
At a premium these days.
Right. So, I really wanted to start almost from the beginning, and just have you tell me about the beginnings of Bandalier, the company that you run currently, and kind of frame it around what problem you were looking to solve.
Yeah, so it was actually sort of related to a problem I experienced very directly, which was in my previous role prior to starting Bandalier. I was managing an inside sales team for a startup based in New York City called Bond Street. And my role there was I was managing sort of a hybrid inside sales / customer success team. What Bond Street did was we made loans to small businesses. So we'd sort of taken the traditional process of obtaining a loan for a small business that requires you to, walk into a bank branch, submit a whole bunch of paperwork, have it faxed somewhere, wait months and months and months, and basically create an online portal where folks could apply and actually get approved for a loan within 48 hours. So
streamlined.
It was a pretty remarkable. Yeah, exactly. And my team's job was to speak with small business owners all over the country. And it was really my first exposure to what an absolute freaking nightmare it is to hire folks in entry-level sales roles, particularly I would say in tech hubs like New York City, San Francisco, where a lot of the sort of tech boom has been taking place, for a variety of different reasons that folks in the space are largely familiar with. Right, it's super expensive, first of all, to hire people in any role in those places. There's a ton of competition for talent, right? So you've got dozens, maybe unfortunately not right at the second as we speak, but in a normal economy, you've got dozens and dozens of companies that are hiring for pretty much the same roles. And largely what they're doing is they're reinventing the wheel, right? because each of them is hiring folks who are right out of school, basically training them in entry-level sales, and that's a process that can take weeks, months on end for a startup that is focused on something completely different, right? They're focused, in our case, we were focused on lending. Every startup's focused on its own products. The idea of reinventing sort of the standard sales curriculum from scratch doesn't always make a ton of sense. And so at the time we started looking for solutions to that problem, one of my thoughts was, wouldn't it be nice if there was just an on-demand sales team I could spin up that had already received or was receiving that type of basic training, that could set up appointments or do some of the sort of high level or top level work, top of funnel level work rather, for me and my team, right? So set up appointments with small business owners, do some of the introductory calls, and then hand them off. And was just incredibly disappointed by the array of options I found. It felt like everybody, all the services I was talking to were sort of legacy providers that might be a great fit for like the Time Warner Cables of the world, but not really in tune with the needs of growing tech companies. So that, in a nutshell, is the problem we set out to solve. And we set up shop up in Binghamton, largely because it's home to one of the biggest and best public universities in the Northeast, obviously, and so what that means is we've just got constant access to a stream of really, really strong entry-level talent. And what we do is we provide services to companies like Bond Street, right? Software companies, tech startups that generally are looking to digitize some sort of fairly traditional industry, and they're hiring us to do some of their top of funnel sales work.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you chose SaaS specifically, as your opening model, and obviously you've kind of branched out from there. Would you say you did that specifically because Bond Street, you saw that problem in a very micro lens, or do you think the tech industry was more, you just saw it as more of a ripe opportunity? Like where did that choice come from?
Yeah, I think the way we'll often describe it is we see a massive opportunity in tech. We don't necessarily see that the opportunity is limited to tech, right? And that is to say, there are a few things about tech in the tech world that make our solution, I think, a particularly good fit. So first of all, the tech companies we're targeting tend to be situated in parts of the country where it just happens to be extremely expensive and very onerous to hire people, right? So New York City and San Francisco, as two examples, are some of the highest cost of living, most expensive places in the country. That happens to be where a lot of tech companies are based, right? It is also true that tech companies have seen a ton of growth, obviously, over the last 10, 20 years. It is the fastest, or one of the fastest growing sectors. And so what you see is that there's a ton of these companies who have demand for these roles, and by virtue of other features of tech companies, it's particularly difficult for them to hire folks in those roles, right?
Of course.
And I think another factor that's become relevant for us is the types of folks that we hire, I think, are often particularly well suited by virtue of their backgrounds to explain these technology products to some of the end users that we're targeting. And so I think we've got a very, one of the things we'll often point out is the people we're hiring are often, particularly well situated to make the pitches that our companies need to make, essentially. So I think for that reason, we found a particularly good fit with tech, but it's also true that, we work with staffing companies, we work with IT companies, we work with government programs that are looking to target small businesses and explain why their grants are good fits for them and get them to apply. So we really work with a pretty vast array and a pretty diverse array of different companies and organizations. And I think all of them, the one unifying factor is that they need somebody getting on the phone, sending out emails, going on LinkedIn, and introducing prospects to their solution. Yeah,
and it was always interesting to me, your hiring process, because you're not necessarily looking for someone that has experience in that specific field to then go into sales, say just for like automotive tech. You're not looking for someone that has those specific skills. You're looking for someone that's predisposed to those skills, and then teaching them the necessary sales skill sets to succeed. So I thought it's a way to move fast in hiring, that a lot of companies, like you said, the main problem was they can't do that.
Yeah, I think the top of funnel for salespeople, is, so to speak, and what I mean by that is like the types of people that you're recruiting, and certainly the types of people that you're hiring. It's obviously one of the most important inputs into your sales process. And what we found doing this across dozens of different companies, talking to lots and lots of different companies, is that for a lot of companies, that hiring process is fundamentally broken, right? And part of the reason is exactly the fact that they don't have the time to build out some of this basic training. And for that reason, what they optimize for in their hiring process is they're looking for people who can tell them what the training should be, right? So they're looking for people who can come in and tell them they have 10 years of experience. Hey, I've got experience doing this. You don't have to worry about anything. The problem is that oftentimes, first of all, it's fairly difficult to substantiate that experience, to really understand it in the context that that person was in, understand how well they actually did in a previous sales role, particularly if, as is the case in most of these instances, they were selling a completely different product to a completely different market. But the second point is that we have found through doing this across dozens and dozens of different hires, and actually scoring out different factors from the interview process and from our recruitment process, that experience is not one of the more relevant factors, or at least not one of the more predictive factors of somebody's success in our campaigns.
Yeah.
Well, we find there are certain behavioral traits that we screen for in our interview process that wind up being very predictive of someone's eventual success. And so we try to optimize our process not around identifying what somebody has done in the past necessarily, but the behaviors they've exhibited. And another way of putting that is we don't try to optimize for necessarily what somebody has sold in the past or their performance in other sales roles. What we do try to understand is the behaviors that they've exhibited in the past, because we find generally that those are fairly predictive of the behaviors they're going to exhibit in the future and in our role specifically.
Yeah. And it's, that kind of brings me to one of the next questions I wanted to ask was, Kaizen is a concept that not everybody might be familiar with, but it's pervasive throughout your organization. And now, even more so than ever, continuous growth is something that a lot of people are looking at to continue to be effective in our new reality. So like, what was your initial exposure to Kaizen? Maybe explain what it is a little bit, and then we'll talk about how you manage your teams remotely utilizing those concepts.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. It has become probably more relevant for us than ever in this sort of in this year period we're in, adjusting this new reality. But I think, first of all, Kaizen for us originated as a concept when I think we were probably 4 or 5 people, and we sat down and wanted to determine what our values as an organization were going to be, right? And we sat down, and one of the things we determined very early on in doing this and going through this process was like, every time somebody joins, we ask them if they've ever worked in a company that has values or had values.
Like 4 letters based on absolutely arbitrary information that has no actionable use.
Yeah, so we always get one of 2 answers, which is like, no, I don't remember, or people start rattling off buzzwords, right? You start hearing about discipline, hard work, teamwork, family.
The posters that everyone puts up on there. Yeah.
Not to say we don't believe in any of those things. We certainly do. We like people who work hard. We like people who have discipline. We like people who believe in family. Like, all those things are incredibly important to us too. But we were determined in going through this exercise to identify something that was unique to us as an organization. And I think more importantly, something that we'd be willing to sacrifice other things for. And the more we talked about this and the more we talked about what we wanted to characterize this as an organization, we landed on this concept of continuous learning, right? This idea that it was most important to us that no matter what else was going on in the world, we were constantly focused on small incremental improvements, right? And that people who worked for us had that drive. And I think there's a variety of different reasons why we think that applies to us and why it's important in our roles. In a way, it might actually not be important or might be less relevant in other organizations. We go through that in our training. Yeah. But I think at its core, and we arrived on this concept of Kaizen, which is kind of interesting because Kaizen is actually a concept that originates from manufacturing, right? And the idea behind it was, during one of the earliest uses of a form of Kaizen was actually in American factories during World War II. Actually reminds me a little bit of the current period where you had factories previously around and previously manufacturing Fords, GM, Chevys, right? Just consumer car factories that were suddenly being transformed into making materials for the war. tanks, missiles, planes, that sort of thing. And they created this rule on factory floors that, given the new reality and given that they had to shift things so suddenly, as I imagine they are now, they created a rule that, if you were a line worker in this factory and you had an idea for something that could improve the efficiency of the overall process, you could actually stop the line, suggest it, and they would test this out, which was a dramatic
before that, yeah.
Yeah, dramatic departure from anything they've been doing previously, where they were just, make more cars, make more cars, make more cars, whatever you do, do not stop the line. Right. And we saw a lot of analogies between that transformation and what we've seen on the sales side, which is that there's a lot of organizations, and particularly a lot of call centers, that have this mentality of, somebody standing over someone's shoulder with a clipboard, make more dials, make more dials, make more dials. Do not think creatively. Do not think outside the box. You've got a script. Just perform the activity, right? And obviously, activity is one thing that's predictive of your eventual outcomes in sales, but it's not the only thing, right? And so what we determined was that within our culture, we wanted to hire people who would, first of all, be predisposed, but also would be trained to constantly be thinking outside the box, right? Certainly, I want you performing the activities, but every day when you sit down, I want you testing something, right? I want you testing one script against another script, even if it's something small, maybe one email subject line against another email subject line. The goal being that if you perform a fixed number of activities each week, you're constantly improving in the results being generated on the basis of those activities. And in fact, actually, some of the Kaizens that people come up with internally, some of the ideas for testing actually relate to improving the number of activities you're able to do on the basis of some change in your workflow. And so that's something that has become a focal point of our culture. And we do a few things to try and optimize for it. One is in the recruiting process. Everybody who gets hired now gets asked a question about, and I'll give away one of our interview questions, which is about an out-of-the-box idea you have come up with in the past that benefited you or an organization that you worked with, right? And what we find is that when people come up, when we find in that answer truly creative ideas that led to actual results, that's generally predictive somebody's going to be able to come up with really creative tests for us. That's one way we do it. The second is at the beginning of every week. So tomorrow, every team of Bandalier will sit down. Everybody's got an activities goal. Everyone's got a results goal, but everyone also has a Kaizen or an A/B test, which is something that they're working on that week that is designed to drive more results out of a fixed number of activities. Maybe it'll be a script modification. Maybe it'll be some difference in the way they're sending emails. Maybe it's a little bit of a difference in targeting, but something they're going to be testing this week and that they'll report on at the end of the week in terms of effectiveness. And then finally, when we promote people, we don't just look at aggregate output, like how many results did you generate? We actually look at your growth. So over this period of time, how much growth did you exhibit in terms of your numbers, in terms of your performance, and how much growth did your team exhibit in terms of its numbers, its performance? And in aggregate, we prefer to invest in somebody who goes from here to here than somebody who goes from here to here. And that's how we try to design our promotions process.
Yeah, and I mean, have you noticed more? So Kaizen, and full disclosure, I used to work at Bandalier, so let's get that out of the way right now. But have you noticed more so that people's Kaizens are related to their personal activity at home right now? Are they kind of trending more towards like being efficient in the workspace that they're in currently?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting these last 2 weeks how important this process has become, because on every single program we have, with maybe one exception, everyone's being forced to rethink their script. Everyone's being forced to rethink the channels that they're using. And so it's not necessarily strictly focused on like how to be productive when you work from home, although some of them have. A lot of the Kaizens, just looking through the list, which I do every week, are around, hey, I'm going to try this script, right? I'm going to try this test. We actually just had an organization-wide contest, a poll of 10 different strategies people have been using in these last 2 weeks to try and actually connect with people and to try and actually get to the point where they're having a conversation, because it's obviously so challenging for salespeople right now. And I think, what's been really gratifying to see is when you've got 50 to 60 people running tests every single week, the organization as a whole starts to learn from some of those results, and we're able to adapt much more quickly than we would if we just sat down at the beginning of those 2 weeks and said, okay, everybody's going to be using this script for the next 2 weeks because we think this is what's going to work. So this bottoms-up approach has benefited, I think, all of our programs, because it's allowed the different programs to learn from one another in terms of what's working and what's not. So I'll give you a very, very specific example of this that in retrospect now seems like it should have been obvious, but it actually wasn't. It was at the time, which is one of the things we've learned across programs is that including any mention of coronavirus or COVID-19 in email subject lines is not a good idea, right?
No.
We're seeing substantially lower open rates for what is now an obvious reason, which is that everybody's getting bombarded with every brand they've ever interacted with on an email-related coronavirus, and people basically don't want to open those emails. But 2 weeks ago, when we were just at the beginning of this thing, we didn't really know that, right? And we wanted to, I think it was with good intentions, we wanted to make sure that our outreach was relevant, that we didn't sound tone deaf, and that we were actually relating what we were selling on behalf of our clients to what was actually going on in our prospects' lives. But we realized very quickly that we had to do that in a more thoughtful and sensitive way. And in the last 2 weeks of learned that lesson, in a few cases in a hard way, but we've learned it quickly and have adjusted the way we're doing outreach as an organization accordingly.
It's very appropriate, that you're almost using an open source model, specifically considering that you're in, majority tech industries where a lot of the information that's being shared is open source. A lot of people are giving away, they're giving away their content right now. They're giving away their added value, specifically because they know that being super aggressive in terms of your messaging, it doesn't match up with what people are trying to accomplish right now. So, I mean, when you say that you're changing your messaging, is that a lot of what you see is just kind of being more empathetic but still maintaining a sense of authority when you make those phone calls?
Yeah, I mean, some of this stuff is really, really basic, and we're learning day by day, but even in terms of the way you're greeting people, right? I found this on my calls, and I know some of our reps have been A/B testing this. When they're on a call saying, "How are you?" right now, that seemed totally normal. Now I'm on a call. Sometimes I'll say, "How are you?" just by instinct, and people start laughing at me.
Yeah.
How the hell
right.
I am? I'm stuck at home. I'm worried. I'm anxious, both about my health and about my business. So even something as basic as that can sound tone deaf versus how are you holding up, right? Yep. Literally, that minor difference actually makes a huge difference to the overall tone of the conversation. Into making you seem like a human being as opposed to somebody who's reading off a script that might have been designed 6 months ago. And at the end of the day, yes, the messaging has had to get less aggressive. And I don't think we use necessarily overly aggressive messaging to begin with, but I think it's really important to our clients right now, understandably so, that they come across as being sensitive to the situation that we're in. And I think if to the extent you're doing outbound right now, the biggest impact you can have is by starting a conversation, being sensitive to what's going on and saying, listen, I understand if this is not the right time. I'm just looking to open up a line of communication. Why don't we set up a time for the future? Or by speaking specifically, and when you're lucky enough to be able to do this, to how your solution can help them given the time we're currently in. And there are certain industries right now where that's actually particularly true, just given all the changes in the economy over the last month. And for the most part, that's where we're trying to focus a lot of our clients right now.
Right. And I mean, that's where everyone's moving, it seems. And it's so important, especially because everybody's on pause. They keep calling it the pause. But right now, building relationship, building communication is of the utmost importance. So I was wondering, what tech are you using right now to keep within your teams and with potential prospects? What tech are you using? Just a couple examples to really, stay top of mind, but also maintain that effective communication within your team.
So one of the things, I think it's a great question, and can definitely kind of list out some of the tech we're using to stay sort of as connected as we possibly can be right now. The one thing I'd point out is I question a little bit the premise of the idea that the entire world's on pause, though it often feels that way. What we've been finding, and I think part of this is a function of just working with clients in a bunch of different industries, is that there are vast differences in terms of what's going on in different industries. Right? So I have some weird conversations where, you talk to somebody who feels like they're on a different planet, right? Because they're saying, hey, March was actually my best month ever because I'm providing a solution right now that's actually more relevant to people than it's ever been. And to the extent they're coming to us, it's because they need us to help them triage all of the demand that they're suddenly seeing in the last few weeks. And it's tricky, right? Because I think nobody would ever want, to create the perception that they're in any way benefiting from this. But to the extent providing a tool that can help people through it, as an example, the tool that we're using right now, it's actually more essential than ever that you get that message out to people and that you get people using that tool that can be helpful to them. Probably all the time, but no more so than a period like this. And so to that, some of the tools that we're using right now that I think have been absolutely essential to keeping our teams connected are Outreach, which is the tool we use for all of our outbound sales, our sales acceleration tool. So any outbound dials, outbound emails, all go through Outreach. We use Zoom primarily for video conferencing, which I just can't say enough good things about Zoom. I know that they're sort of the darling right now, but it's been absolutely instrumental in keeping our team connected. One of the things we've started doing, and I'm seeing emerge out of some of the Kaizens within our organization, are like virtual happy hours, or like meetups a day. Every Friday we have a team-wide meeting where everyone on the team sits in our leadership meeting, so everybody has an idea what's going on. And Zoom's really been what's facilitated that. So it's actually been really cool to see how instrumental a part of our culture it's become. And then Slack as a tool for communicating between the team all day, going back and forth. So I would say those are the tools that have probably been most helpful. The other one would be Kaizen, which is our analytics tool. And the reason that's so important is it allows us to keep tabs, and everybody's working from home. We have a very firm idea of what activities are being performed. When we see dips or spikes, we get the notifications, and we're able to see on a given team for a given user what needs to be done and what managers need to be doing to get programs back to where they need to be, or on the opposite end, it helps highlight where there's exceptional performance within the team. So I think all of that's a great deal of comfort in people work from home.
Yeah, and it's, you're not to say that it's a luxury, but you have the benefit of having built out a lot of those systems before our current situation, obviously, just with the nature of your business. So what would be, if in a very top level sense, what would be a actionable piece of advice that you could give to a company that doesn't necessarily have those systems put into place? Like, is there something high level that you could add to that conversation?
Yeah, I'm trying to go back to when the first times we had our teams work from home, right? And I think a lot of it, probably 90% of these tools, and whatever tools you're using, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I think so long as there is communication, right? So some of our tools are really, really simple. At the end of every week, everybody submits a form that just states what their activities are. And I can go through that very simply and just understand what's going on pretty quickly within the organization just from that one form. We ask them for feedback on what's going on at Bandalier, how they feel, their morale, feedback they have for their client. That's a super simple tool that when people are working from home is absolutely essential, right? It might not have been as important. Everybody was in the office and I could just go up and ask them at the end of every week, or we were able to have a huddle. But because we can't do that, getting that type of reporting becomes really important. And you don't need to use particularly, we've got these fancy BI tools. You don't really need them necessarily to get the high level story. You just need to send them a form, have them fill it out. So I would recommend that at bare minimum, to the extent you are driving people to work from home, things you might have avoided in the past because they may have seemed like overly bureaucratic. So reporting, forms, those kinds of things actually become more relevant, right? Because it allows a very quick picture as a manager on what's going on across the organization. And then the second piece I would actually argue is more important is communication, right? Checking in with people via Zoom, via Slack, texting. I was talking to one of our clients who's got a ton of experience in managing actually remote call centers. So her entire business has been helping companies set up remote virtual call centers, and she's really understanding how to boost productivity in that environment. And one of the recommendations she made that I think was terrific was having just multiple check-ins, even in the course of a given morning, to ensure we're kept in the loop. And I think really, really important. We found just in the last 2 weeks that and I see it because I see it on the end of week forms, people saying, hey, it was really important that my manager checked in with me, twice in the morning and did a daily Zoom with our team, it made me feel connected. Whereas if you think about it in the office, it might not be the case that your manager's walking up to you twice in the course of a given morning to check in on you, but it becomes more important in an environment where you're literally not seeing anybody all day.
Yeah.
And then I think variety, right? So mixing up the activities, inserting different spiffs, challenges through the day is important in a context where people literally are leaving their homes.
Yeah, and it's obviously something that you are, you kind of mentioned it earlier, the tracking, data analysis, the things that can seem people avoid because they can seem robotic or they kind of lose a sense of culture over time. It seems as though you work the balance between actually using data-driven results and maintaining that human connection. So I think that's where the marriage of those two concepts really comes into play for your business, it seems.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. So it's sort of one can't live without the other. You could be you could track as much data as you want, but if people hate coming to work every morning and don't feel like anybody's paying attention to them, you're going to see that borne out in the results. And by the same token, you can spend a ton of time on communication and a ton of time sort of empathizing with your team, which is of course super important. But unless you have a mechanism for actually tracking performance, it's going to be very difficult for you to coach them when it comes to having an understanding of what's going well and what's not going well, and getting that feedback.
Yeah, for sure. And I've been at companies that I was there for 6 months before I had a one-to-one, and it especially in an environment where you're just sitting in your office with all of these distractions, with potential pitfalls in technology, that what you're saying is that communication just becomes even more so important. One thing that I think, obviously, laying out Kaizen and having company vision moving forward, I think when people are tied into that, when they can buy into that messaging and when they can really feel like they're a part of that team, that's when you get people that are self-motivated. That's when you get people that are willing to become a part of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So I guess, Kaizen, continuous growth, what are you growing toward right now? Obviously things are so jumbled and it's very hard to predict what's going to happen next week, but bigger vision, what do you see for your company and who are you trying to help next, I guess?
Yeah, so I think it's a really important question right now, because I think the honest answer any business owner is going to give you right now is we're trying to get through the next week or two and figure out and again, figure out what our new reality looks like. But it's actually more important than ever not to lose sight of that bigger picture in the context of where we're going through right now. So I think, for us, the bigger vision for this company has always been that, we believe in this idea of, enabling these remote teams, right? Teams that don't necessarily sit in our clients' headquarters. And we think that type of work, in some ways, what's happening right now proves this better than almost anything else, that type of work has become easier in the last 10 years, right? It has become easier for one of our clients based in New York City, San Francisco, even Sydney, Australia, Canada, wherever the case may be, for them to have an SDR based in Binghamton, New York, and for it to feel like they're an extension of their in-house team, right? That they don't necessarily have to be our client headquarters. And what that functionally means, and this isn't, I don't think, talked about enough, is that technology actually acts as an enabler of job creation in places where these jobs might not otherwise have existed, right? I will always ask, 10 or 15 years ago, I think it would have been very unlikely that the SaaS companies that we're working with now would have been looking for SDRs in Binghamton, New York, or that they would have found it as easy as they do now to have SDRs in Binghamton, New York. But because of all these tools I've mentioned, because of Slack, because of Zoom, because of Sisense, we've really, I think, been able to create an experience where a lot of our clients feel like our team members are just as much part of their team as anybody else who might be sitting in their headquarters. And so over time, what we'd like to be able to do is build out facilities like the one we have in Binghamton, in towns and cities like Binghamton all across the country, and to expand our service offerings beyond just sales to really any of the functions that might be relevant in in the context of, a tech company and their growth, right? So right now we do sales, but one day it might be marketing, accounting, HR, sort of any of these core functions that are critical to a company's growth, but could potentially be done by somebody who's been recruited and trained by us, and then deployed on behalf of our clients. And so one of the things that's been really interesting in these last 2 weeks is obviously we're being forced a little bit to start exploring what some of those functions are in this new reality we live in, right? What is the type of work that companies need to be done right now? And we're starting to see where that lies. And I think we're going to learn a lot more in the coming weeks as well.
Of course. Yeah. And I've always been a big fan of how flexible a lot of companies are becoming. You can sprint hard in a direction that you didn't even see 3 months ago and become proficient in it within another couple months to where you can scale. Really, like you said, anything that these tech-based businesses are needing. So it's cool because your vision is there, but that translates into flexibility, into speed, into efficiency with your teams in a way that, like I said, allows them to become a part of that and really buy in to your mission.
100%.
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback off of that, I saw Corona Companions, the new program you started. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the things we started thinking about fairly early on in this whole thing is, and to their credit, I had team members coming to me literally in the first week saying, "Hey, how do you think we can, have an impact here as an organization? What kind of volunteer work could we be doing?" And we started thinking a lot about kind of where our skills are most relevant in the context of what's going on right now. And I wish I could claim credit for this idea, but the way this actually went down was that one of my friends from college reached out to me and said, "Hey, I saw this program." She actually lives in the UK. She saw this program in the UK that was basically a mechanism to reduce the impacts of social isolation. So one of, I think, the real untold stories here, and it's untold for a reason, which is that relative to obviously the medical the medical issues of folks who are winding up in hospitals, people who are really have their life at risk. I think this obviously gets sidelined, but still is a profound issue emerging from this whole thing, is that you've got a lot of people sitting at home alone, weeks on end, and if you are a person who gets lonely naturally, not being able to go outside, not being able to see anybody, is a really powerful and really dramatic issue. And so I think we've tried to spend our time thinking about, okay, what are the ways we can address that issue? And she pointed out that there was this program in the UK where they'd actually have people doing calls, volunteers making calls on people, largely the elderly who were isolated in their own homes. And I know the power of that just myself, and I'm fortunate actually not to be in a position where I'm totally isolated right now. But for me, it's so important to have conversations just like this, right? Just to talk to people virtually, even via Zoom for half hour, an hour at a time, to feel still connected to the world. And so we realized that we've got an entire team of folks who love talking to people. That's one of the reasons we hired them. Literally, what they do for a living is talking to strangers all day. And so she suggested, couldn't you have your team members volunteer, to call on, to make calls to, anybody who wants to chat. And, it's not pure, it's sort of not a pure charity thing. Like, I think our team members are looking for opportunities to connect. And I think there's a lot of folks out there who are looking for that same thing. And so within a day, our team spun up this Corona Companions program that basically mirrored what my friends had seen in the UK. And we went out and asked our team for volunteers, for folks who'd be willing to chat. And the first one of these I think happened last Tuesday. It was just, somebody who signed up on the site and was literally just looking for somebody to talk to. And cool to see that coming to fruition. Obviously, it's a small thing. There are people out there who are making enormous sacrifices right now, and I recognize that this is a small piece of the collective issue that we're facing. But I think sort of true to the tune of Kaizen and sort of small incremental changes upward, this I think was a problem we could make a small dent in. So
Yeah, yeah, it's, I see so many companies that are being creative in the way that they are helping their community. And it seems as though you're able to expand that beyond just Binghamton. You're able to expand that really to whoever you can reach. And that's important, I think, because it's, we all have our community focus, and it's very important to be, focusing where you need to, but not everybody has a strong sense of that community for themselves. But and like you said, it's your employees will gain from this as well. Their empathy skills, just connecting on a personal level, being able to relate to somebody that doesn't necessarily share a lot of their life experiences. So I see that as being a positive growth, like you said, for all parties involved.
yeah, and I think the other thing I'm noticing just in the last few weeks, really anecdotally, is like connection seems to be sprouting up. I mean, I've spoken to friends I haven't spoken to literally in years, or
Yeah.
just checking in, right? Hey man, how's it going? How are you holding up to this thing? How's the business doing?
Yeah.
I have groups of friends who probably see each other, once every 3 or 6 months, that are now connecting twice or 3 times a week to keep each other company through this thing.
Yeah.
And I think one, very small silver lining to this whole thing is people realizing that connection is really important, and that we have all this technology at our disposal that actually makes that much easier than it otherwise would have been. One of the things I was chatting with my fiance about yesterday was, man, imagine if this thing had hit in 1999 or 1995 or 1989. Obviously, we had the Spanish flu, but none of us lived through that. Imagine if this happened in a world where connection would have been, much more difficult. And the one silver lining is we have tools like this where we can connect. And I don't want to make it sound like it's the same as connecting in person, because of course it's not. But nonetheless, it certainly makes the burden of this thing a little bit less.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, Zoom calls like this, Zoom was very well positioned for this moment. So the last question, well, before the last question, where can people find Bandalier? Like, where, if they wanted to find your company, where can they find you?
Yeah, so the easiest way to find us is online, Bandalier, BANDALIER.co. On our website, we've got a nice little chat bot there. So if you want to speak to us, that's the easiest way to do it. You could also just email me directly at Jeremy, JEREMY, at bandalier.co. So yeah, that's probably the easiest way to reach us.
Cool. And so my last question then, I've been playing around with this concept of, like, if Jeremy Ruch had to create a work from home policy for himself, for you, what would that look like? Were there like 3 or 4 things that you would have to include to make sure that you're keeping your sanity, efficiency, just kind of the things that are top of mind for you day to day right now?
It's a great question. It's actually something I spend a lot of time thinking about, because I am trying to craft something like that.
Yeah.
It mirrors what I've been doing working from home, because I guess I'm fortunate in the sense that I have done quite a bit of work from home before this too, because I go back and forth between New York City and our facility in Binghamton. So I think the first rule I put in place for myself is planning. This is something I've never done, frankly, in any previous role I've been in. Started Bandalier every single morning. I'm religious around opening my notebook. My computer screen is closed. I put down the 3 or 4 things I need to get done that day, and I'll categorize them by the different functional areas of my position, and I'll try to prioritize them. I do it every day, and right above those 4 things, I actually write down the mission of the organization. So I've literally written, if you look through my notebooks, every single page has the mission of our organization written 4 or 5 times for each day. And I'm going through this exercise. It's a very, very helpful grounding exercise for reminding yourself, like, the purpose of what you're doing and then what you actually plan to do. So that for me would be rule number 1, is not necessarily that exact planning process, but some sort of planning process that outlines what you want to get done in the day. The second would be, I try as best I can not to have any days that are completely jam-packed with meetings back to back to back to back to back. If I can space them out over the course of the week, I find that to be better. And I also try to have, especially when working from home, no days where I'm not talking to anybody at all. So one of the things you'll find on the calendar, and I've noticed this with myself and noticed it with a few folks on my team, is that meetings tend to bunch up for some reason. You'll find like you'll suddenly have a Tuesday where randomly you're back to back to back, and then a Wednesday it's totally open. As best you can, especially if they're internal meetings that you can control, best to space those out so you get a little bit of variety in your day, and it never feels like all you're doing is you don't have time to think, or on the opposite side, if you're working from home, that you have no connection to the outside world at all. The third is getting up and walking around. It's very, very easy to forget in the context of work from home, being pretty religious around, hey, sometime between 10 and 11, sometime between 2 and 3, I'm going to get up and go get a coffee, go walk around, go talk to somebody, whatever the case may be, if you have somebody in your house, or just the act of walking around. You don't want to be in a scenario where you've just been seated in the exact same place for 8, 10, 12 hours without moving around. So I found that to be really important. And yeah, those would be some of the mainstays of the policy. And then, to the extent you're a manager, it would be checking in with your team and talking to your team, understanding what's going on a day-to-day basis, making sure you're even more so than typical, staying true to your one-on-ones, making sure that those are happening on time and regularly, because it's more pivotal than ever in this environment.
Yeah, and although business as usual is a term that doesn't really make sense in this moment, trying to get as close to possible, skew toward that, it seems is obviously important when you're managing 70 people. Did you say 60, 70 people?
Yeah, I think we're at 65 now. So I think that's 100% right.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy, thanks, man. I really appreciate your time. It's been great having you here.
It was great chatting with you.
Yeah.
And best of luck with everything.
Thanks, man. We'll be in touch.
Adios.
Later, man. Thank you so much for being here for episode 1 of the Work From Home Incubator podcast. I'm really excited that I get to talk to people that are well established in whatever arena it is that they're coming to us from. Whether it's remote sales, whether it's working from home for administrative positions, side hustle entrepreneurs, regular digital marketers, anybody really that has something to add to your work from home lifestyle, I want to talk to them. While you're here, while I got you, subscribe on YouTube, go to Apple, go to the iTunes store, give us a 5-star review. I'd love to hear any feedback. Go to wfhincubator.com. Check out our Discord channel. We have a lot going on over there, lots of new projects, and a lot of new tips and ideas that you might not access anywhere else. So yeah, keep on checking out our new episodes. Next week is going to be Andre Heichel. He's a 20-year-old college student who's written 2 books, has his own media agency, is just a digital superstar. So thanks again. Looking forward to speaking with you soon.